So this is what we're making. A bracelet, in this case, with a little bit of wire shapes. I want to call it filigree, but it actually isn't. Filigree fills up the whole space, and it's normally made with twisted and hammered wire. So these are just wire spirals. That's it. Nice and delicate. This piece is going to use 2mm round wire, a foot long, 30 centimeters, 300 millimeters, 12 inches, twice the length of your bench plate. It's all good. Anyway, cut a length 30 centimeters long, file the ends flat, and solder them together and make as perfect a solder joint as you can. I just cut the wire with my side cutters, but whenever you do that, you end up with this little pinched, sharp bit on the end. File it flat, both ends, and I usually get my materials half hard because you want to be able to form this quite easily. If you get it spring hard, it's really difficult because it always wants to spring back. And by getting it half hard or dead soft, you don't have to anneal it. And as we work it, whether we planish it or tumble it lighter, it will work harden it. So just form this around with your fingers until these ends match perfectly and solder it with hard solder. If you can get this so that spring tension is holding it perfectly aligned, great. I find oftentimes if I just lay the piece sideways on my charcoal block, and I like using a hard charcoal block because it reflects the heat back. Oftentimes you can lay it so that its own weight will hold it perfectly aligned. So this is very well aligned. I'm not going to do anything with it other than flux it and solder it. So one piece of hard solder about 3 millimeters long should be more than enough for that. Check your flux. Mine's a little bit dry. You want to use distilled water to top it up. That way it doesn't have it's not chemicals, it doesn't have the elements in your tap water that'll make your solder joint go black. Oftentimes iron in the water will do that. So mix up your flux. You can put just a little spot where you're going to solder. And I'm going to pick solder this just because it's easy. If I can get my torch lit. Sometimes when you haven't had your torch on for a while, you have a lot of air in the line. I just crack the line and bleed the air out. So heat up your solder pick. Keep it red. Touch the solder. It'll turn into a nice ball. Heat your joint, and you can see that I'm heating away from the rest of the metal. So I'm just heating the joint with my solder pick hovering above. So I'm not actually heating the solder or the pick. Bring your metal up to temperature. When the flux goes clear, you can pretty much place your solder with your pick, and the solder will flow almost immediately. Now what I do once the solder has flowed, I'll turn it over and make sure the other side is good. So I'll just flow it again, have a look at it. Yeah, nice and liquid. And then I just flip it over and have a look at this side and make sure that the solder has flowed through. And in this case, it hasn't. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now I'll quench it and form it. Now when I quenched this and I checked it, my wire was slightly out of line. So what I'm going to do is flow the solder again and just gently push with my solder pick sideways to get the wire down so it's level. One of the advantages of soldering on a charcoal block. So there it flows. I've just given a little push. Now, this is a technique I like. What I'm going to do is use a tapered mandrel and just hang my wire on there. And then I'm going to take my ring mandrel, which has the same diameter as the end. I'm going to put it on the other end, and I'm going to hit this with my rawhide hammer. And what that does is it gives me a nice straight bracelet form to work from. Otherwise it's quite difficult to straighten this. I've got a couple little bends yet that aren't straight, so I'll whack it again. Just be sure you use a rawhide hammer when you're hitting your ring mandrel. You don't want to put marks in it. Now, I put my solder joint on the side when I stretch this. When you put it on the very end, it's really asking a lot for your solder to hold those two bits of metal together when you're trying to force them apart. If it's a good solder joint, it's absolutely no drama if it's up on the side, and it's fairly easy to clean up here. So this is the basis for our bracelet. I use this for a lot of different bracelets, whether it's a cabochon set stone or a coin bracelet, whatever. Today, filigree, and it's not really filigree because filigree is really fine work. Basically, I'm just going to do a little bit of wire scroll work. Probably use 1.2 diameter wire. And it just, I like Art Nouveau. I love the scrolls and the flowing lines. So I'm just going to do something that reminds me of that today. What you can do is you can take this full-size piece. If you need a bigger bracelet, you just make this a little bit longer, smaller, a little bit smaller. It's logical. This is exactly 150 mil long. And to check your bracelet length, you would just start in the center of your wrist, wrap this around. When you get back to the center, that would be the length that you'd use. I sell a lot of cuff bracelets, and most of them are 150 mil long. Tidy up your joint now before we start working. If you had good alignment and if you use the appropriate amount of solder, you should be able to just take a piece of sandpaper, I use 400 grade, wrap it around the wire and rub it back and forth, and the join should just disappear, and that's what we want. We want a join that you can't see at all. Make sure all of the solder is taken off. Then we'll lay this flat and lay it out. Now, what I would do is I would draw this full size on a piece of paper. I would sketch the scroll work full size on paper because it's easier to do it on paper than it is to do it in metal. And then you have an idea of how much you need to cut for each piece. So after you've made your frame, put it on a piece of paper, draw around the inside so that you can be working full size. Lay out your patterns, do any number of patterns, and when you've picked the one you like the best, make your wire shapes to fit inside. If you're doing spirals, cut your wire to length, file the ends on a bit of a taper, and I just use my number 2 cut flat hand file. And the reason we do this now is it's once you've made it into a spiral, it's almost impossible to get in there and tidy up the ends. So a small taper is just to make it a little more aesthetic. Just to make it so you didn't just chop off your wire. Figure out what's the inside, because that's the part where we're going to solder. Usually that would be the part that's a little more dodgy. Mark the center. Lay your piece on your charcoal block and put your pieces in, and you want to adjust these so that they touch both sides, or you can solder one side and then tweak the edge of the bracelet so that it touches the other side. Ideally, you would file a small flat on the wire, but you don't have to. As long as they touch. And I usually tweak it so that the wire is up a little bit so that it's just in the center of the bigger wire. Otherwise it'll be flush on the other side. It doesn't matter. It's just slightly different in the way it looks. So put all of your pieces in. Get them so that they're where you want them. And flux just at the point where you're going to solder, and lay one piece of hard solder right in the join where the two touch.